Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be here to present some death findings. I know it may sound strange, but in fact, these findings will show you how disabilities became livable among past people. And you will also see that my findings not only reflect their life experiences, but also how other people looked upon them back then, that inform us about how we view disabilities now. As Maria told you, there are some 65 million Europeans that live with some sort of disabilities today. That is 10% of us. So it might be you or somebody you know. And there are many preconceptions about what life is like for those millions of people and what consequences their disabilities have for them. And if being disabled results in, for instance, stigmatization, that also says something about the attitudes among the so-called normal majority in the population in society. Now, I will take you back in time to see how present preconceptions are due to past views of disabled people. But how will I do that? Let me show you by pulling out two people from the 19th century. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Kajsa and Jonas. Both of them were born into a farming community about 200 years ago. As a child, Kajsa was recognized to be deaf, while Jonas was noted to be crippled in his teens. While Kajsa found a job as a maidservant, Jonas never had any occupation and stayed with his parents until death at age 33. Kajsa, she lived on to be 57. She married a man and gave birth to 7 kids. So in terms of their disabilities, Kajsa and Jonas had very different lives. Now, were their destinies typical for their gender or the group of disabled people they represent? Well, having access to a unique historical database here in Umeå, I can map out disability, life, and death in larger populations. And this graph shows the mortality risks in a 19th century region in Sweden. More than that, it reveals that men paid a much higher price for their disability than did women in terms of premature death risks. You see the big gap here between the black line, where we find Jonas, one of them, and the blue line, non-disabled men. Their mortality was not as high over the lifespan as for Jonas. But if we look at the women, and the green line covering Kajsa, for instance, the gap between women like her and non-disabled women were not as huge. This indicates that disability did not add as much to women's mortality as it did for men. Yet, both genders were hit by death if disability was present in life. Now, did different disability influence mortality differently? Well, looking at this graph, we see that mental disabilities, the yellow bar here, is higher, the highest bar. That means that it's associated with the highest death risks. And again, among men. And also black bar with crippled men, where we have Jonas, run pretty high mortality risks compared to the non-disabled men here. And looking at the women, we see that deaf women and blind women as Kajsa, well, their mortality was not particularly much higher than non-disabled women. So type of disability mattered. This lovely painting, illustrating a minister visiting his parishioners at his annual church examinations, explains why I know what I know about Kajsa and Jonas and the other 35,000 guys in the graphs. At these visits, the minister asks his parishioners about the 10 commandments. And he also made notes about their impairments, which I am the first to measure like this. He also reported about the different jobs they held over a lifetime, whether they married and gave birth to kids, and who the father was of the kids, if it was a woman. And all these factors helps for most of us to make life more livable, no matter who we are, when or where we live. And thanks to this data, I know that people with disabilities were less livable. But why? People just don't die because of their impairments. It takes more to explain that. And I think that past society and the able majority in the population back then, be it laymen, from laymen to medical doctors or ministers or priests, as here, they took on a negative view of people if impairment made them look or behave differently. And that view was more than just based on the impairment itself. But even though such a negative attitude does not kill you right away, it worked to limit your opportunities in life, as we've seen here. It made it difficult to get a job, to make friends, and find decent living conditions. And in the long run, it rendered bad health and premature death risks, as we have seen here. But how come that men paid a higher price for the disability than did women? We have to recall the 19th century. Back then, men were supposed to be strong breadwinners, to provide for themselves, their kids, and their family. And most of them did by taking up rough works as farm workers, craftsmen, or in factories. For disabled men like Jonas, such work may have been difficult to conduct, or perhaps few wanted to hire these men because they were regarded as unfit or weak to work. 19th century women were not supposed to be strong breadwinners. They were supposed to depend on breadwinning men around them, father, their master, or their husband. And these women found their job opportunities in the service or household sectors as seamstresses or maidservants. And apparently Kajsa took up a job in the household sector, which was just fitted her gendered association with being a woman. So it seems that disabled women could find a job that more matched their gendered norms than could men. And that helps explain why Kajsa found a job and income and also married a man and lived a longer life than did Jonas. Now, what would these people's life stories look like if they had been born in the early 1900s or the year of your birth? Well, we can only speculate because we can only speculate about their job opportunities, their circle of friends and family, and the chances of self-development, because there are no such studies made yet, not on a substantial number of people, nor on how their lives developed. But in the next few years, my research team and I will precisely do that type of studies because we have access to data on recent people and populations here in Umeå. And then we can tell you more about their life stories, all the way from the 1800s until now. But until then, we have to make guesses and depend on statistics that just indicating the prevalence of disabilities in today's society, be it 10% or more. This does not say much about how disabilities become livable, or if this world is a better place for people like Kajsa and Jonas. In a way, it must be, thinking about all the welfare provisions that 19th century people could not enjoy nor dream of, or when thinking of all the economic, medical, and technological developments that have made our lives more comfortable and healthy than perhaps ever before. If we met Kajsa today, a cochlear implant may have helped her to hear. Maybe Jonas was working in front of the computers that now have replaced much labor that was once manual. So in many ways, the recent developments must have change and increase the opportunities of people in society. Moreover, our lives is not as gendered to be a man or woman now as before when it comes to education and work, family formation and partnership. Had I been born in the 1870s instead of the 1970s, then I would hardly be a professor plus woman. It was almost unthinkable about 100 years ago. So all this exemplifies how structures and views in society shapes all our opportunities. But has the last century of changes really increased the opportunities for disabled people, or changed our views of what their life is like? I am not so sure. And ask yourself, I know though that history shows it takes a long time to shift human values. And it was not many decades ago disabled people were locked in at institutions or were subject to rehab programs to make them more normal. Our history is both bad and beautiful, but it is powerful. It can make us to prisoners of past preconceptions about how disabilities limit human life. But in making us aware of precisely that, historical knowledge can free us from our limited views and make us see, become less blind to what people really can do, being disabled or not. So, history matters and shows us that it is much up to us to make disabilities livable in the future. Thank you.